Hey everybody, this is Erica, and today Susan and I talk about another really interesting patient, quite complex actually, and she's been, kind of around the block. But long story short, she had right posterior tib pain, and at the end of the day, no surprise, her cause of her problem was her thorax. So enjoy, and I hope you learn a lot. I certainly did. Hey Susan, how are you?
I'm good, Erica. How are you? End of summer.
God, the summer, for me, the summer went by very quickly because I moved, I think, and it just sort of, I don't know, I'm kind of happy, to be in some fall weather, actually.
Yeah,
So,
we're very blessed in the Northeast quadrant right now,
I know.
especially after everything that happened in the Southeast part of
Oh,
Texas. So
I know.
our hearts go out to them,
Yes,
and
yes,
we're thinking of you every day.
yes. I know.
Okay.
All right, so
Oh, yeah.
no, we'll just get right into it.
Yeah. Tell me what you got going today.
So I have a patient who I still treat, but I treat her for other things. She is a actress dancer. She's in a Broadway show here in New York City. And she came to me, gosh, just looking at her eval, well over a year ago with right posterior tib pain. And I think since I've seen her so much, I look back at her past medical history and I realize, oh, now I see how, why this happened and how she's progressed the way she has. But I'll give you basically her demographics and things. She was 43, probably 44 now, right posterior tib pain. She's had it, and she's been dancing and acting in this Broadway show for quite some time. A couple of years ago, she was out of the show for about 7 weeks, and she did the show after that in pain for 1 year. And she received a PRP injection in October of 2015 into that tendon. And it healed her tendon, but it did not heal her. And she was at her wits' end. She was not working when she came to see me. She was referred to see me by somebody else in our field, and they were treating her ankle and foot and having her do calf raise, and she just couldn't really perform in the show. Since Phantom it's in Phantom of the Opera, so she has a lot of costumes and a lot of corsets, and she has to carry things, and that's a lot when you have foot pain. And the shoes that you actually have to wear, it's so funny, Susan. I actually went to see her, I think probably in March of this year, maybe. I don't remember. I actually went to see the show, and I got on that stage. I could not believe how hard those stages are. I mean, the shoes alone were hard, but then on a hard stage, I think it's at the Majestic Theater, and it's a beautiful theater. And I'm standing on the stage, and I'm looking around, and I'm like, this would kill my back, just walking on that stage alone. That was an eye-opener for me. So anyway, her past medical history basically was she sprained that right ankle many years ago. She had MVA, which, aggravated your lumbar spine. She had a left tib fib injury as well years ago. Other than that, no basic really sort of medical history that was relevant. So with her, she was really depressed and upset that she hadn't gone back to work, and that was a big thing in rehab, to be honest, and we had to sort of get her out of that. But what she could not do, a couple things. Her first thing is she couldn't do a releve. That was the number one aggravating factor. The minute she went up onto releve, the right foot pain started, and that was it. And also weight shifting onto that right leg, and then weight shifting and doing a single leg stance, boom, the right foot started to kick in. And then as we started, getting on in treatment, pivoting and things like that. So the interesting thing, what made her feel better was like a low-level BAPS board. And I didn't really understand why, but that's what she told me. So the first thing I actually did look at, I'm just looking at her eval, was her releve. I mean, at the end of the day, I think that's what really bothered her. But I did look at her standing posture, just because she is a dancer, an actress, and I think she was really compressed in her thorax. She had all these shifts, and I said, I'm just going to get a baseline, sort of like a car check, just see where she's starting, right? And she was, interestingly enough, her center of mass was kind of like on her right foot, and then it was on her left. She was like shifting as she was standing in front of me. And the one big thing I did notice was that she had this thoracic rotation to the right. So she was really on her left leg after all was said and done. So I said to her, when you're on your left leg, just shift your weight to your left leg. What does that do to your right ankle? It aggravates things. It causes twists in that foot. So, and she got that. So when she shifted her weight to her left leg more, she's like, oh, my foot hurts. So just understanding, making her understand where her center of mass was, I think is important. So I had her do the releve, and boom, the shift. I mean, her symptoms started. So then the biggest thing I noticed was that, yes, her foot, she had some issues in her foot. Her right foot was hypermobile. She had, more of a pronated rear foot and midfoot, and probably tensioning that posterior tib, which obviously wasn't helping, right? So the big thing I did notice is that when she went up into releve, she shifted the weight to her left leg. And it didn't make any sense to me. I said, well, you kind of need to be almost, not perfect, but you need to be somewhat symmetrical with this, because she has to carry things. She has to carry costumes. So I don't know how you feel about when you tell patients, you need to be almost symmetrical. I don't like to say that, but with her, I almost had to, right?
But it's very interesting. What I find so interesting right off the bat of just taking a look at her and just trying to get, like, where are you in space? It's not like we're thinking the posture's bad or the posture's good. It's just, where is the starting point? And for her, she didn't even really have one.
No.
It sounded like that perhaps maybe her brain wanted her off of her right foot because of the pain.
Yep.
But when she got onto her left foot, her pain increased. So she was really kind of searching, it sounds like, for where do I even begin to to get where I can be still and not have to move so much. And then the second thing I find very, very interesting is that this is all occurring after she had the PRP, right?
Yes.
So although maybe the ultrasound showed that her tendon was looking better, more like a new tendon and not like an old tendon, or not as degenerative, but she was still having the same amount of symptoms, especially with loading.
Yep.
And so, that, and I think that's why I probably would have gone to what does loading look like with her as well, because that's what's so important. And I know that we do try to stay away from terms like symmetrical, but if you are not using we also need a little bit of a posture for performance. And if you're having pain and you're having problems doing it the way you're doing it, how can we get them to understand a call to change? So, and for sometimes you may have to use the language that they understand as a dancer. Yep. And a dancer understands, a symmetrical foot placement. That's just a term they use. I don't think it necessarily has to be dangerous or a scary term, but I think it's just something that kind of goes right in and strums their knowledge system right away. Like, oh, I need to shift and be here. So interesting.
Yes. Yeah, and she was great with that. And I think as treatment came, as we progressed in treatment, she was able to figure things out as well in her body, which is great. It makes my job easier. So when I checked her releve again, I noticed again that the shift to the left side, particularly in the thorax. And so what I did is because that was the most obvious thing, without even putting my hands in there, that's what I was looking at. And I just went on a gut feel. So I went into her thorax, decompressed it a little bit, got her over on her right foot. This is all in standing. So I'm using my hands again here. So I did a little, almost like decompression traction on the thorax, shifted her center of mass. Basically, that's what it ended up doing. Got her on her right leg. I said, do a releve. She did a releve. She was pain-free, and she literally started to cry. And I was like, oh, no, and because no one had done that before. And prior to coming to see me, she had been seeing somebody else here in the city, and they were doing, calf raises and things like that, which was making her worse. And because she was a workman's comp, although I don't take workman's compensation, she came to me privately, so she had to continue to see these people, unfortunately, for a while because of the workman's comp issue. And at one point, I basically told her, I think this is in the 5th or 6th time I saw her, I said, you need to stop seeing them because they're making you worse. So she did. But it was a little tricky because it was a workman's comp issue with her, and I think that was a lot of emotionally as well. So anyway, I digress, but that's important because if you're seeing somebody and they're seeing other practitioners or chiropractors or acupuncturists, it's important to be able to manage that multidisciplinary team.
Right.
So basically, corrected the thorax, releve got better. And so then I said to myself, well, why? Why is her thorax compressed? And we started chatting a little bit more about what she did in the show. And she carries like 25 pounds in her left hand, a lot of costumes and things like that. And I said, okay, let me check the diaphragm, external obliques. So I went in just with some listing techniques that I do, and her external obliques were it just jacked up, so hypertonic, because she carried in her left hand, she rotated to the right, shifted to the left, and she was standing like in this right rotation with these things in her hand. So I went in and I opened up Rex. This was the first visit. I literally went right into treatment right after the relay because it was so moving for her, and I felt I needed to get that buy-in pretty quickly. I went on and I looked at other things, which I'll say in a second, but I went in and released her external obliques, did a seated diaphragm release, got her up, and I didn't think I was going to get much of a change because it's been such a chronic problem. But she was more on her right leg, not 100%, and I still corrected her, but less, and she did the releve and she was still pretty good. However, I wanted to go and, since I was up at her thorax and my hands were on her, I couldn't get my hand on her foot. So what I did, just because I wanted to check to see what effect it had on the foot, not just a subjective sensation of, oh, I feel great, the releve is good. So I really had, opened my wingspan up and practically got on my knees, did what I call a partial correction, which is what I've learned in these series with Diane and LJ, that you put your hands on, I was on her left side of her thorax, decompressing one side. My right hand was on the foot, just feeling. So I decompressed her left side and her right foot started to stiffen up, which was amazing. And she felt it. So I knew that it helped the foot. It definitely stiffened it. It wasn't so, taking that path of least resistance into pronation or tensioning that posterior tib. So she was bought. She was in at that point. So what I did, this is just the first visit, I checked the weight shift because releve was just better immediately, and it did help the foot. So I checked her weight shift because she has to shift a lot in the show. Same thing, she shifted the weight, and thorax shifted left, rotated right. Same thing. I decompressed and I got her, and she was much better. A couple of other things to note in this postural, the starting point, she did have a lot of rotations and other issues we call, I'll just say, path of least resistance or buckle points, right?
Mm-hmm.
They all got better. Like she had a twist in her pelvis, and she had a couple of other things going on in her neck, and she has had a chronic neck issue. But they kind of all looked better when I went in and corrected her thorax. And ultimately, what I did, I had to write a letter. She had to wear a corset in the show. And I was like, no, you can't wear a corset. That's compressing you. If you're compressed and the results of the clinical evaluation show that you need decompression, you can't wear a corset. So I had to write a letter to the head of the show. So we put her in a Spanx and took her out of the course. And to this day, she's not worn a corset in the show because of that reason.
And that's amazing with the costumes that they have in the Phantom of the Opera. I used to, there was a musical director that I knew I still know him for years and years and years and years. And his wife, she was the dance captain there in New York up until about 2013. So I've seen the show. I've been backstage. I've been front stage. I've been on that floor. What makes that floor so interesting for these types of dancers? And if you are treating performing artists out there, try to find its way to get into their venues, either their practice venue or their performance venue, because you will learn a tremendous amount about what's going on. And as Erica was saying, it was such an eye-opener for her. Every stage is different, and some stages have degrees of raking, which means they're angled. And what makes the Phantom show so interesting is they've got all of these hard slats on there because the floor constantly moves. That's how they move the canoe. Yeah, the boat all around, and there's little candles that come up and down.
Yeah.
Now I'm using my hands, and and different things, but it's a very different floor because it really, it's not a floor that they can put Marley down or any of the other kinds of stuff. This is like hard as a rock floor, and I'm telling you, those shoes are so bejeweled that if they had any give to them at all of the little jewels would come flying off. So, I mean, they're like really like walking around in buckets.
I know. And even like it's true. And I went to try the wigs on. Even the wigs are compressive.
Oh yeah, it's a very heavy show.
There was one costume, she didn't wear it, but it was all beads.
Yeah.
And it was literally, I don't know, 50,000. I mean, it's an absurd amount of money, and it was worn for like 45 seconds in the show. It's crazy. It's really crazy. So you're absolutely right. If you just go and sit, it's important to see them in their venues. So
yeah, anyway. If you're going to do that, even musicians, I think it's just important to kind of see the whole thing that goes on. So I think a couple of things I just wanted to highlight here with you, because I love the way that you moved away from her foot to see how is the whole system moving. And, I know that you were talking about the thorax looked a bit compressed. If we want to, there's a lot of ways we can put that into a lot of different words. Shirley Sarman would call that a medial rotation of the left lower extremity with a right trunk rotation. I mean, you can call it out there whatever you want to call it. Right. You see it in a certain way because of the way that your eye is kind of worked with the people you've been mentored by. And I love the other way that you were talking about just being able to reach from the thorax to the foot. And what you're doing is you're basically just kind of taking different handles of the body and putting some novel input in that's helping them move in a different and new way.
Yes.
It's not ways that are foreign to them. Their brain remembers to move that way, but it sounds like, I love this because one of the things, just looking back at her history, she's been doing this show for how many years?
Oh gosh, at least 7.
Okay, so the patterns that have developed from having to stand on the left and hold those heavy costumes in the left arm.
It's crazy.
And it's repetitive and it's over and over and over again and very little variance in her, in her performance stuff. And so no wonder you saw that when she was just standing there.
Yeah.
But her inability to break out of the pattern wasn't so much, it's just that she got such a strong motoric loop developed around this pattern because she had to have that pattern for performance.
Yes.
So,
and I think for her, she needed to understand that because I said the reason why you were getting worse with the calf raises is because the foot's not the primary source of the problem. It's secondary. So, and she got that. She really did it. And the basically the evaluation, I focused a lot on education. I spent way over my time with her for sure. She was a very complicated patient. And I basically sent her home with a couple, child's pose, down dog to open up the thorax. And we talked about taping her foot because her foot was secondary. I didn't treat the foot at all. I didn't put my hands on her foot, not once. But I did tape it a little bit to just offload that tendon just because she asked. And I didn't think that a little tape would be any problem. And it wasn't. It really wasn't. So, and she ended up taping herself at some point. So she's no longer doing that. But we did that for the first month because she needed to, it's almost like when you're so attached to something, you can't cold turkey that particular body part, I think.
I love it.
Say, I just need to a little bit in the foot. So I didn't touch it. I just taped it.
I've spent so much time caring for this foot.
I know. It's like letting your child go to college. You need to sort of so we did that. And what I also did pretty quickly with her with the foot, I gave her the Recognize program. The Recognize app. Yeah, and she did that, and we did mirror box, a lot of mirror box with her, and we would do just basic, seated novel inputs with the foot, flexion, extend, dorsiflexion, plantar flexion. Then I had her do some seated heel raises, things like that. She ended up getting a mirror box, or her husband made her a mirror box for the show in her dressing room. And she also had like a foam roll she was doing some stuff with for something else. But she did that mirror box. And whenever it flared up in the show early on, we got her back to within 3 weeks, back to work in 3 weeks.
Wow. That's great.
Yes,
And she's
yeah,
been off for 7.
for a long time. Yeah, so
Mm-hmm.
she did the mirror box in, maybe an intermission, and that really helped her. And cannot, especially with someone who's had so much invested in her foot, she needed to desensitize that area, physically and
Mm-hmm.
emotionally, I think. So I think the mirror box was quite helpful, and the Recognize app. And I did that from the get-go. Maybe second visit I did that.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting that you bring that up, because I need to go back and probably review that literature again, because I've been using the Recognize app a lot. I
Mm-hmm.
don't have a lot of people who are coming with the foot being the major problem. They're
Mm-hmm.
usually a secondary or tertiary problem to something going on trunk or pelvis with me.
Yep.
But I find that I've just found it very, very interesting that when they download the Recognize app and they get to it, they will come back. And this is without instruction on my part. I just tell
Mm-hmm.
them that, the research says if you can do it as much as possible, obviously
Right.
you can only work in so much during a day.
Yep.
Do it whenever you can. And I leave it up to them to try to figure it out that first week. And they all come back, those that actually download and do it. Some others it takes them a couple of weeks, like, give it a try. But they will say that, I notice that if I have pain and I sit down with that Recognize app, I can lower my pain numbers by, a significant amount, whatever it may be, 2 points or 1 point or 3 points. And, so their question is it the app or is it because I have sat down? And it's like, maybe
Yeah.
it's both.
Yeah.
Maybe you were hurting, so you paid attention, a call to action for change, and you did something to change your brain.
Yes.
There's a lot of variables in there, but at this point, it's working.
Yes.
And we know that there's a lot of, science behind the left-right, recognition and application, and, decreasing the brain smudging and, bringing the brain out of that loop and making it pay attention to other things.
Mm-hmm.
And, I actually even had somebody go as far as to tell me that I've actually started looking at people's parts of their hair on TV, trying to see if that's a left or a right.
Oh,
I just
interesting.
interesting that they start carrying it over. But I just think that's fantastic that this was the mirror box, especially because she didn't have to sit down, get a phone at intermission, or do anything. She could just slide her foot in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
She was going to be sitting there anyway, fixing makeup, doing something.
Yep. Yep.
What a marvelous way for her to be able to take it down a notch.
Yeah. Yeah. And she really got it. And I think at one point, this was months, she was back, she was doing well. She came to me and she's like, my foot's sore again. And I'm like, what, and I'm like, what happened? So we're going through, and I'll come back to the initial eval in a second, but I said, think of something. She's like, well, I have new shoes in the show. I said, oh, you have new shoes in the show. So, and she went, oh, you're right. And so I said, do some mirror box with no shoes. And she did, and she was fine. But she was still ramped up, a little bit ramped up. And I was like, just relax. It's your shoes. You change shoes. Okay? You change shoes. Different input. Exactly. So she went back to the mirror box in the shoes, and she was a lot better. But I think her recognition, it's almost like our job to sit her down and say, okay, what changed? And people are like, oh, nothing ever changed. There's something that changed,
Yeah.
And they did. So that was good. So getting back to the eval, so I basically left her with the child's pose, and I'm just noticing here, I gave her some weight shift to the right with some mental imagery, decompressing her thorax, putting, imagine you have balloons in your armpits. And she was good with any kind of imagery, because she's done that, with acting and such. So that was probably the first couple visits. And in terms of just basic treatment, I did a lot of work to her external obliques. I did diaphragm releases. I did some work I did a lot of breath work with her because of what she's doing. And I also ended up taping her 7th rib, so on her left side. So I took a piece of Hypafix and then Leukotape, and I'm using my hands again. I basically took it just around sort of the mid-axillary line and just took it up and cross midline, and just to sort of decompress that side. And I did that fairly regularly for at least a couple of months, and that helped quite a bit for her. And we proceeded along for a while. I did some side-lying thoracic openers. I call them book covers. Anything to really open up her thorax. And
Mm-hmm.
then I started her, I'm progressing quickly here.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to the mirror box, as well as the recognize, I started her on some unloaded exercises because she's in the show, she's lifting. I can't help her. We can't stop having her to carry 25 pounds. That's part of the show. And I believe Hal Prince is the so he's not going to change the show. So
Right.
basically I started her, we call these sort of beginner phase 1 or whatever you want to call it. I actually had her because I need her to do exercises that's going to train the cause of the problem. So I didn't have her do anything with her foot. Like zero.
Mm-hmm.
I said, stop your calf raises, stop anything that they give you on, the other place, just don't go there. We eventually did, but not at the beginning because
Right.
the cause of the problem was not found at that point. So over at the other facility. So I had her unloaded doing basic tricep extensions, cueing her thorax. I had her doing reverse flies, cueing her thorax. I had her do some arm lifts, alternating as in supine hook lying, alternating arm lifts. So she took that tricep extension, reverse fly, and alternating arms with cueing, maybe 2-3 pounds, which is nothing compared to what she lists in the show. But she doesn't have the control in the show. She needs to train her control. So she didn't have when she carried the 25 pounds, she didn't have that control yet. She was like in the show, she told me she was cueing her brain like crazy every minute, and we can't have that. It has to be an unconscious act, right?
Mm-hmm.
At some point. So I started her in very low, and that's what I started her with for quite some time. And I think people are so quick to bring patients to loaded activity, and I think that's important. But with her, I needed to take it down all the way because they started her load at the other facility and it just wasn't working. And
Mm-hmm.
I think with somebody like that, with someone complex, you need to really start at the beginning and see how they control their load in basically control the weight in an unloaded position. She can't control her thorax and her foot's all wacky and hook lying. How's she going to do it in standing and getting on a releve, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the interesting thing is when we think about, there's that, load, and I agree loading is great. But if you're loading in a way that's giving you an experience of pain, we need to change it.
Yes.
And sometimes I think when people are loaded all day long, that maybe the thing that works really nicely for them is to get in a position of unloading, because again, it's a spectrum. There's times when we should be unloaded and times when we need to be loaded. Mm-hmm. And her occupation is to be loaded. So I love the idea of unloading her, but also training her so that she can handle the loads that she needs to carry during the show.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're bringing her back with the intent that we're going to get you stronger and more coordinated so that you can actually do the things in your show without having to think about them so much.
Exactly. And I think people like her, like actors and dancers, they tend to overdo in a way. Like she was overthinking a lot of things, and which to her credit is good sometimes because she was able to correct when needed. But the basic thrust of the treatment for a bit was, just to recap for people who are listening, was diaphragm releases, working with breathing, lateral costal breath, doing some lateral costal breathing, doing lower trunk rotation side to side, external oblique, releasing that. I had her do the taping of the thorax, and she taped her foot, or I taped it or reinforced it when she came in. And we just basically progressed the weights at that point, and she was doing the mirror box and recognize on her own. I didn't really do that with her, and she got a lot better. So, but we still hadn't gotten her to 25 pounds. So she was coming in, and there'd be weeks that she was doing really well. And I think that, this is where I think I myself as a clinician need to make a better jump sometimes, because when you have patients who are doing well and they're back to whatever activity they need to do, but they're not at 100% in terms of like with her, she was doing her activities in the show, but with correcting like crazy, taping, mirror boxing, recognizing, and we need to get her out of that at some point. So she was able to do all the unloaded exercises with good control, no problem at this point. And a lot of people would say, okay, you're good to go. But she really wasn't, because I felt deep down that I needed to get her in these positions with weights in her hands in the clinic to see where she's failing, or where, as Shirley Starman would say, her, what is that called? DSI, direction of susceptibility, whatever it is, her buckle point, basically,
Yeah.
right?
Or basically just see what movement strategies are you using, and how can we give you some variance in those, right?
Exactly.
How can we help you make
That's
those
easier.
different? Yeah.
I like it that way better. And I find myself sometimes with patients, even to this day, that I think that they may be good in doing basic activities, but they still need to either get back to judo, get back to carrying 25 pounds in a show, and that a basic leg press, or a basic, lying on your back doing the tricep extensions and reverse flies, that will not cut it for them to get back.
No.
So if people discharge this patient at that point, she will be back in 3 weeks, a month, with the same problem.
Right.
So what I did, and what I'm trying to do more, is to get them in the position, the loaded position with the weight in their hand. She brought her shoes a couple of times, but she couldn't do that all the time. So we were just, basically trying to simulate what her shoes were, or barefoot at that point. So I had her in the clinic, putting the 25-pound weight in her hand, and pivoting and twisting. And you could see she was losing it immediately with the 25. She was shearing. Her head was twisted. It was just not great. Although, I think, I don't know if your experience is, I think dancers and athletes are the biggest compensators of all. So, I mean, she compensates, right?
They definitely fall into their patterns of that they develop for themselves, and it takes some work for them to be able to change some things, and to get some variance in their movement strategies, because it's been ingrained for so long. And she's been in this show for 7 years.
Yes, a long
so
time.
it takes and I think you're right. I think that we get people to a certain point as PTs, and I'm guilty of it, and I've seen other people do it. And I've had patients who, well, my therapist got me so far. Now I'm looking for some other health professional to get me further. It's like, ooh, we need to have finished our job. And it's like, it's okay to let them go for a month and work on this, and bring them back, and then recheck and load them up some more.
Yes.
Because, we want people need to we live under gravity. We need to work under load. So,
yes.
And I think that certainly would have been a terrible disservice to have gotten her so far in, using the mirror box, and she was out of pain. Great. But like you said, she was having to do all of these things, and you eventually want her to be able to, I don't need to have all these things. When do I really need to have them?
Yes.
When, I've moved past that, my brain has changed. I've got this. Oops, my foot was sore. Okay, I can go use the mirror box a little bit and get it going again, and then I'm back, to, whatever reminders may be. But I think that next step is really kind of fun, because that, to me, that's where the real creativity comes in too, is like, okay, how can this show me exactly what you have to do in the show, and let's figure out how to train that.
Yes.
And let's figure out how to get you moving in, 3 different ways to carry that 25-pound load that isn't the pattern you usually do, so that your brain has choices throughout the show of movement and changing and doing things without, taking you down the path where you set up that loop again, and everything starts to, your brain recognizes that as that, ooh, that's that danger loop, and boom, here comes the expression of pain.
Yes, and I think with her, she's like, are we going to do foot exercises? And I was like, no. You're using your foot with all the functional movements that we're doing now. So we're not going to specifically isolate your foot, because it's not the cause of the problem.
You're actually exercising your foot very nicely this way.
Exactly. And I think with her, she made changes. She actually switched her arms at one point in the show to carry minor switches that would make a difference to the outcome, So she ended up putting some of the costumes in the right hand. And so what I did was I actually watched her do that. I watched her pivot. She's like, but I feel good. I'm like, but you don't look good. So you're not moving in a way that you do this over and over and over again for 2 hours they don't even have, they have one day off a week. They actually have a show on Monday. So it's a lot of time on your feet. So you may be feeling good after 10 reps here, but trust me, at the end of the week, and usually at that point, a couple months into it, it was the end of the week that was the issue. It was the buildup of all of her bad strategies. So what we ended up doing is I made her tape for the show at that point, we taught people how to taper and things like that. So she did that. And that sort of she was able to sort of drop down her conscious corrections that she was always doing. And what was interesting, though, when I actually put her in the pivoting, and because she also, when I went to the show, she had to bend down a lot. My God, I didn't have no idea. She's constantly bending down. And that's one motion I didn't look at. She didn't complain about it. It's not something that I thought at the beginning was relevant.
Mm-hmm.
But I felt that because of the fact that she was carrying in her hands, causing her to lose control in her thorax, and then she had to bend over, I needed to look at that. So what I did, the same thing, I did the same evaluation, and her buckle point was always loss of control in her thorax. She wasn't stiff. I didn't do basic joint mobs. If I did anything, it was just oscillatory things to dampen down some tone. I didn't need to manipulate her thoracic spine. It wasn't going to be helpful, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
It was a control problem. So I built her up to 10, 15 pounds. I had her shifting and pivoting. I had her standing, doing a side lunge with rotation, different things to sort of mimic what she did in the show. I mean, I think our options are basically, our limitations are just our creativity, and that's limitless, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So we had her doing step forward, step backward, side with balls, weights as well. I'm using my hands again. Step forward with rotation left,
Mm-hmm.
rotation. I didn't have her do a ton of rotation, right? Because that was her path of least resistance.
Right,
So
she was good at that.
Exactly. And so
it's like, don't need to train what they can already do. Let's train what they can't do.
Exactly. Because she said, no, should I do the other side? I'm like, no. No, do not do the other side. It is important that people listening understand that. If they're good at one side, they do not do that side,
right.
Especially with her, because we needed to get her brain out of the right side in terms of rotation right. So we did a lot of rotation left. We did, and we trained the weight shift with a lot of weight. I did that fairly regularly, and then we just stopped taping her. What we did, because she was very reluctant to wean off the tape, I took the Leuko tape off and I just did Hypafix.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point I took the Hypafix off. But what was interesting is she still had to see her workman's comp doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And who was a foot guy, and she saw him for her whatever appointments or updates, and he's like, I'm still going to keep you on as under this work. And I'm like, oh darn it, just discharge her because she's good. So she had this emotional connection to the fact that she still had a foot problem,
right? And that's the unfortunate part of the certain systems when they're not really functioning in the best way possible for people. They're attached to it because they don't want to rock the boat that way, because what are they going to do if they do have a problem and they can't work? And that's when workman's comp kicks in for them. And it's a real catch-22. It's a real problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but it's when you have to kind of work around, and that's the reality with, dealing with performing artists, is they're going to have this. Sometimes I think some of them, not all, do have kind of a adversarial advocacy kind of, back and forth with the system, and some of them learn how to work it very well, and some of them, are quite dependent upon it, and usually born out of fear that if you don't do this and you don't do this, we cut off your benefits.
Right.
And, and so to them that's terrifying, because they've worked their whole life to get onto this show, and, they will do anything that they can to stay, underneath the umbrella of the show. And it makes it really hard. It does, because it does create that. And I love how you address the fact that you weren't going to isolate and do things with the foot. So you were able to kind of begin to desensitize her from her foot as a primary bell ringer. But you still addressed her foot because she needed to feel, and so to me, that's really holistic. You talk to her about, but we're doing this and this, and so that's exercising your foot, but you still addressed it. You don't use the mirror box. It's okay. A little tape. What does tape do? We don't know, but it's a novel input, perhaps. But what it did for her, it sounds like to me, correct me if I'm wrong, it just made her aware that you understood that she was worried about her foot.
Yes.
And so you kept that lifeline there for her, like, okay, yes, and your foot is still part of your body, and we're still going to keep it all together, and we're not ignoring your foot, and I'm still listening to you because I know that you're worried about your foot, so, and I like that, and again, with the trunk too, it's like maybe that novel input into the trunk with the tape was enough to just every once in a while give her a sensory reminder to move different. And then as she got better with it, you were able to kind of take it off, and because she got dependent on a few of these things.
Yeah.
You took it off. Let's put this tape on. Like we know Hypofix isn't doing anything.
No, I know.
Like tape on the skin, but it's pulling on the skin, right? And so every time it pulls, it may tell you, "Oh, that's right, move this way."
Exactly. And it's funny because I think with complex patients, you do have to at some point address their legitimate symptomatic area, whether it's physically or just verbally. And but as I was explaining to her, we weren't getting better with treatment done to your foot. So, and she got that, but the corset just was making her worse. And I think to this day she doesn't wear it. So, but I think she just recently actually just got discharged out of that system, and she walked in, "I'm so happy," she said, "I am no longer seeing my foot doctor." I was like, hallelujah, how long, was just so happy because I think it just, in her brain, it just cut it right off.
She was ready. She was ready. Yeah, yes, she was ready.
Totally.
And it needed to give her time to get there.
Yes, for sure. So ultimately, that was the basis of the treatment, and I really shortened it up because she's was there coming for a while, and I think at this point, she wants to start. She runs as well, in her off days, but she wants to start running. So we may start doing a little bit of strengthening. But I'm seeing her for her knee and her neck, and she comes in. I said to her, I would be seeing like a massage therapist, physical therapist every day on that show because it's just so tough on your body. So I see her for different things, and not really for her foot much anymore, mostly for her neck, actually. Those wigs are just crazy. But I wanted to ask you a question. Because we needed to progress her to all of that heavy load, I don't know what you do when the patient is in, let's say for her, it was holding a 15-pound weight in her left hand in a squat and pivoting. We're looking for her path of least resistance, but do you do release work or any kind of soft tissue work in that position?
I'm not sure that I would call it release work. But I kind of feel like that sometimes when you're trying to get people aware of a pattern that they're moving in, that if you can get them in the position and put your hands on and move and help them, I call it neurological nudge. I'm giving their system a little bit of a neurological nudge to feel something a little bit different. I always start with the, trying to get them to do it a little bit different. See if you can do the same thing but make it different and see what they come up with. Sometimes people can come up with beautiful things, or I'll give them a cue like maybe think about where your feet are and shift on your feet, and do some of that. But if they are just really struggling and can't do it, sometimes I will go in, to their trunk or their shoulders or their knees or their hips and maybe bring them out of the squat a little bit or into it deeper, or, move their legs a little bit, just something so that they can begin to feel and explore a different movement, a different pattern around the movement. Does that make sense? So it's more of a pattern.
Yes.
And I'll do things like that because I think that helps them understand that, I really am kind of holding myself pretty rigid when I do this. Like this is my position of performance for squat, but I really almost hold myself really tight in that. And it's like, I need to loosen up a little bit. If we were lifting like their 1 rep max, then it would be more of like, we better be doing that work under, at their 40 or 60% rep max.
Yep.
Not when you get up into the higher lifting loads, you can't change variance very much there because you've got to be able to control that load.
Yep.
So that's all the variance work comes in to give you the best pattern of all for that really 1 rep max.
Right.
So I'll spend, time with them. I might have taken the 25-pound weight out or 15-pound weight out, I think we were talking about, and maybe have put, let's let's put a 10-pound weight in, and
Yes, yeah,
explore
we
that
did
movement just
Yeah.
a bit. Yeah, and then
Yeah.
kind of work with that, and then go back and, load at different levels. But I love the idea of getting into the positions,
Yes.
helping them find different ways to move. And, I think the terminology, whatever we call it, we call it whatever we do. But I think, what it is just getting them to move different.
Yes.
Or
Yes.
maybe even, and I'm sure that you've done this before too. It's like if you see that somebody's really holding their breath,
Mm-hmm.
I'll ask them to, like, my jam is talking and vocalizations. So I have people talk to me, while they're doing things. And as soon as they hear their breath crack up and, get craggly, or they start talking like this, then it's
I
like,
love it.
you're holding your breath. And they can hear it, which is very helpful. And so they have to actually do something different in order to keep vocalizing.
Yes.
And it's interesting to watch and see what they do. But then you can get on and kind of like little, just, you feel where you are. Let's come over here. And, some people will call that a release. Some people don't know what the term is, but I do intervene in the middle of the pattern for sure.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. Well, that's cool. I think that's basically it with her. I mean, it wasn't basic, but the moral of the story is people need to dig deeper. With her, taking the corset out helped. When you see these types of patients, spend the time. And I think we mentioned a billion times in other podcasts, just talk to them. There's something in their story that is being missed by somebody. And I think it's important that people do that.
Yep,
so
absolutely. All right. That'll be a wrap for today.
Sounds good.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your stories today, Erica. And once again, just to remind the listeners out there, thank you so much. We appreciate your time. We hope that you are learning as much as Erica and I are learning from each other every time we speak, which has been fantastic for me. One of the reasons we started this podcast in the first place was we were already collaborating on patients, and we thought, why not make it formal? So here we are.
It's been great.
If you enjoy it, please jump to iTunes, give us a rating, and leave your comments. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. Bye.